Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of Constructed Criticism. This is episode 502, and I'm joined by my co-host, a man who I hopefully enjoyed opening day, Abe Stein.
How's it going? Yeah, opening day was. I love when baseball's around because sometimes you just want something on to fill the sound waves in your spaces, and nothing does that like a game of baseball.
Hey, man, I'm not going to yuck your yum. I personally, my wife asked me to turn off Sports Center because baseball turned on. And I was like, oh no, we're entering the dark times. But I do have so many friends that like they take the day off. They're like, this is it. This is the day of the year. So we're not talking too much about baseball today. We are going to talk about Pioneer, which is a interesting topic right now as we are in a time where we have no RCQs. People are getting ready. People are asking, like, what should I be getting ready for my RCQ season? And we're gonna tell you about that today. But before we do, we are always improving on the show. We want to be better every day. We want to be doing our best to be improving. And Abe, as you had the chance to, miss out on our awesome guest last week, you're gonna go first this week. Tell me, what have you been doing to be always improving this week?
Yeah. So, last couple of weeks, I have been dealing with kind of a stressful situation at work. A lot of like new things being on my plate. A lot of uncertain things out of my control also going on, and I felt this really impacting me up until about a week and a half ago now, like the start of, or like the middle of, not last week, the week before. And I was just really, really like feeling it, unhappy, unsatisfied until I realized that it was because I was focusing on things like well out of my control. Like I'm waiting on a lot of input on things I'm doing, or a lot of a lot of things to come down the pike that are not anything I can touch really. It's a lot of waiting on other people, and I had a lot of trouble with that. But realizing that I had been spending so much of my attention on those things, right? These like things that are way more important than what I'm to what I'm doing than what I'm able to do, and really taking a step back and focusing my attention back to what I can control, down to like really small things. Like I almost just came in and as the lead on this of being like, something I did do like literally today was put an umbrella in the back of my car because I was tired of getting rained on when I was like taking the minute walk from where I park to my job, because there were just so many, like, it feels like such a little thing in like my life, but it's a lot of these things where does it really, when I think about what makes me stressed out, it's like, is that really something that's on the top of my list? No, not really. But is it one thing I can control that I should be focusing on when these other things aren't in my control? And I was like, yeah, I mean, what does it cost me? It costs me, I need to carry the umbrella to my car, I need to know that I have it, and then I need to use it to not get wet, and then like come back. It's going to be raining all week. I'm really happy I did this, and it's something that I can control during this time where like a lot of moving parts in what are going on in my job are just not that. And it felt good.
That's my favorite always improving moment you've ever had on the show. I'm going to tell you why, and you're going to be like, what? There was an episode where I talked about the fact that I was living in a place that didn't have an ice maker, and I dedicated some time in my life to just every time I went into the kitchen, I would empty the ice tray, put it in an ice bucket, and fill up the ice tray. And like eventually to develop that habit, right? And what's so funny is my ice maker broke like a couple weeks ago. And I instantly went back into the habit and now have ice still. And while I wait for it to get fixed. And you might say, like, how does this revolve around my umbrella? But the truth is that you took initiative on something that made your life better and made you happier, that made it so that it's one less barrier to you being your best self. And I think that anytime that we can do that, it will not just improve us at life, but at Magic. and like you having a better mindset all week, walking in not getting wet with that umbrella. Guess what? If you have an RCQ, I guarantee you're in a better mood than you would otherwise be if you had been wet all week and had been stressed at work because you were wet for like 3 seconds. It's just like our mental capacities just are so full of things that we don't understand how they're affecting us. And so, anyway, I just wanted to let you know that was my favorite. I was improving moment of verse. I think that like simply taking the action to put the umbrella in your car is such a small cost, and it feels so insignificant. But I really hope that it makes your week better.
Yeah, it was definitely one of those things where I caught myself complaining about like a bunch of minor little gripes in my day about like, and also the big gripes in my day where I'm like, yeah, I just, I can't do anything about this, and like it's frustrating. I'm like, well, okay, the part of my day where like I'm coming in and I'm like, oh my, like, my arm's wet and I'm like uncomfortable. It's like I could be prepared for that, and so doing things like that and looking out for those things and like reminding myself like not everything is in this category of out of my control has been it was helpful to getting through the more stressful time. But how about you, Spencer? What have you been doing to always improve this week?
I had a big week. Before we get into it, though, I want to recommend something for the listeners. I was listening to a podcast on my way to work. It's called Coach's Corner, and it's 4 Super Smash Brothers coaches. And the episode is actually about how to beat Mr. Game & Watch. But trust me, you don't need to listen to the whole thing. The first, 30 minutes of the episode is about tilt and about focusing on things that are within your control. And they actually mentioned a Brian DeMars article on tilt in Magic the Gathering. They go across genres, talk about TCGs for, quite a bit of the beginning of this episode. I'll actually probably put it in the show notes with, timestamps on when they go from tilt into the Smash related stuff. But I was listening to it and I was like, this is a constructive criticism episode. I should share this with the listeners. And the control thing is what I'm focusing on. And it was so funny to have that be my kind of my drive into work. Because I had a really hard month from a health perspective. Not just my health, for what it's worth. Both my kids got sick twice in March. Whether it be the stomach flu, the cold, hand, foot, and mouth, or something else. And I am the type of person that gets sick a lot. One of the things that happened, though, is that I've already had hand, foot, and mouth aid. So I got designated with Maxwell to just be in this room with me for 10 days. Because that's how long you're contagious about. And I love Maxwell. He's my best friend. But 10 days with a 7-year-old nonstop is a lot. And what was funny is I was noticing a couple things. One, I was noticing how it affected my work. I was noticing how it affected my matches of Magic, my matches of Smash. And I had a really rough March. And so I was like, you know what? As I was watching the Arena Championship and viewing, I was watching, I think it was the finals, and how the players would hover over their cards and think through decisions. And it's something I've talked a lot about on the show about focus and understanding what moment I'm in and using the right tools in the right moments as far as my mental capacity. But then I thought, you know what? There's more than that. There is also this level of not fake positivity, but I find the matches of when I'm winning my most matches of Magic, it is when I am not looking at what has happened as much as I am looking at how I can win from here. And I think that if you watch the finals of the Arena Championship this weekend, you see a lot of that. And it really reminded me of that. And so this month I am focused on kind of building a better Spencer through not forced optimism, but what part of my day was good? What part of my day can I build on? What part of that match can I learn from? I had a match today where before the podcast, where I drew only Llanowar Elves and lands playing Gruul. I was like, what can I learn from that? I was like, well, you can learn that even though you have increased your deck by playing Fable of the Beer Breaker, sometimes when you play an elf deck, you just draw elves. And, like, you have to accept that. And acceptance is, like, part of that positivity and that part of that that mindset that I want to get back to. Sorry, and this is really long, but my wife has also been struggling at work. And before the podcast, she was taking our daughter to dance class, and I called her and told her, like, I called her before work, and I was like, hey, we're going to crush this week. We're going to do this. And I talked about, like, my mental state before I listened to that podcast. And I think that it really helped me today at work. It really helped me today in my Matches of Magic. It really helped me today to prepare for the podcast. To go, like, all right, March is over. Let's shake it off and, like, go to a new thing. And it's so funny because, like, you see people make fun of, like, New Year's resolutions or whatever, but I really do think that a specific focus for April for me is really what I need. And so that's kind of my always improving moment, is deciding what I'm going to focus on. This month it's going to be, what can I control, what can I do, and not just from, like, what's going wrong perspective, but also what's going right perspective. So
yeah, I mean, I love what you mentioned there about, like, when you're playing some of your best and what you observed and watching, really high level play this weekend on Arena, is that feeling of, like, spending time focusing on what you can still do and what the future you want it to look like and how you can try to get there from here. And then also at the same time talking about, March bad, it's April, let's make April good. Like, it's just a continuation of that thought process to everything. And I remember it was the Happiness Labs with Laurie Santos. There's an episode about just, like, New Year's resolutions and why those, like, why is that we so often as people, like, psychologically pick this one day or, like, need something like that, something that is a breakpoint, and just adjusting your attention can be so much work, and adjusting your, setting a goal for yourself and doing all these things and thinking differently about the future can be so much mental tax that it helps to have those days that just make it easy to say, okay, this is now new. So everything's new. So I can think differently about it. And it's no coincidence that, like, it's a new month. It's springtime now. It's, it's all these things can be a good point for that change too. So I'm hoping that April is that for you, Spencer.
Thank you. I hope it for you too. Like, we kind of had a rough month as, like, podcast co-hosts, and, like, Mason's not here, and I just want to just shout him out. Like, I love him, and everybody. It's so easy to, like, listen to human beings every week and think that they're not people. Like, they're just, like, they're a part of your life, and so you get to say whatever you want to them. You get to do whatever you want. And sometimes we just need a break, man. Like, sometimes you have a headache and you're like, I will not give my best on this podcast. And I think that it would be better if I was not on this podcast, if that's okay with the group. And what I really love about this group is that we're, like, really supportive of each other. Of, like, we'll do what we can to make the show happen. And we kind of move forward. But I won't lie, man. March was rough for us. We made it happen for episode 500, but, like, we had a rough month, and we're moving forward now.
Onward and upward, baby.
You're like, you don't want to say anything.
It's hard. Life be like that sometimes.
I want to give a special shout out before we move on, just to, like, because I didn't really get to do it, but, like, spending some time with just me, you, and Mason, just playing video games the other night, was something that I needed in my April, that I don't know if you knew how much it meant to me. Just, like, celebrating 500 episodes as a group was a highlight. So, speaking of highlights, shout out to our newest patron, Aaron. Aaron has become our newest patron. We shout out all of our new patrons every single week. And if you want to become a patron, head over to patreon.com/ccmtg to become a patron. You can listen to early access like us right now. I don't know how much of this can edit out. I don't know what I'm going to be doing. But I'll tell you what, you can hear the whole raw episode beforehand where Abe wants to. You gotta listen to that. You gotta listen live. I won't tell you what he said. But thank you so much to Aaron in his world, and also thank you to our sponsors. We have 2 awesome sponsors. We've got Heavy Play, who makes the best playmat. Like, I'm just gonna say it. They make the best playmat in all of Magic, not just in Magic. You got the Pokemon playmats, you got the Yu-Gi-Oh playmats. The best one is the Heavy Play playmat. Check them out at Heavy Play LLC. You just go to CCMTG for 10% off. And then also check out our other sponsor, who Greg did. Did you listen to Greg go off about our sponsor for us last week? That was dope.
I did. Greg did a fantastic job.
Anyway, check out Untapped GG. Like I say every week, I use them nonstop. It's so funny. The first thing, you have to restart your client. For those who don't know, when there's an update. So you have to update your client, and then you have to restart it to load in the new Untapped GG. And it's if I ever forget to do it, I'm like, oh man, this match is wasted. I wasted it by not having Untapped GG. But if you use our code, it gives us a kickback. Just click the link in the show notes. It really does help the show. That's going to do it for housekeeping. That's going to do it for Long Always Improving. Let's dive in to Power Rankings. So, how do Power Rankings work? What are Power Rankings on CCMTG? If you're new here, here's how it works. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, Frank Karsten wrote an article that was how to rank decks in a mathematical way that makes sense for how good they actually are and how they're winning. And so we, based upon that article, made a small adjustment, and here's how it works for us. We pick the events we want to pull from, and then we give 6 points for first, 5 points for seconds, 4 for top 4, 3 for top 8, 2 for top 16, and 1 for a top 32. Top 32 is usually coming in really large events. So this week we're covering only the 4 challenges of Pioneer from this weekend. I was going to do more, but the showcase qualifier was only 42 players. And I was like, you know what? Let's just see how the metagame looks this week. So only the 4 challenges from this week. And I'm going to knock something out of here right away. Amalia Combo is not on these Power Rankings. Amalia Combo wouldn't have come in the top 15 decks on these Power Rankings. And we're going to do basically the top 6 with honorable mention outside the top 5. And I just want your reaction. Like you saw the complete thing. If you are a patron of $5 or more, you actually have access to the full spreadsheet of the Power Rankings. Amalia was not close.
Yeah, I don't know. It's really hard for me to gauge, or at least initially it was really hard for me to gauge, is that because of it's just not getting played a lot, because of it being Magic Online? Is that because it's being pushed down the metagame? But honestly, looking at it, it's the 3rd most played deck in the format on Goldfish. It is not underrepresented at all, and I think it really just shows how of the very powerful and good decks in Pioneer right now, has been the easiest to dedicate a game plan to beating, and how it's really suffering from that in a way that the really good decks of the format that are very resilient and don't have targetable game plans in the same way have flourished by comparison in this world of.
Well, let's.
I don't know how you feel about that.
No, I agree with that statement. It's hard because one of my best friends, he thinks that this deck is the deck to play. Matt Kling, he does Constructed Clash with me. I have not seen it. I've played this deck. It is one of the most popular decks on Arena. So if you play Explorer, it's super popular because you have all of the cards, unlike something unlike the Hidden Strings combo, where you don't have all the cards, right? So if you're a combo player that wants to play deck, this is actually probably the one you want to go towards. And the problem is that you have a really, 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 I should include a cubed, really bad matchup against Azorius Control. It's basically unwinnable. It has been from the beginning. And the thing is that because of that, Blue Eye Control sees play because this deck exists. And it almost is like a self-fulfilling prophecy that you're going to get hate cards because let's take for example some of the cards that you might board in against blue-white control, such as Lithomagnetic Barrage, where they can kill your small things and kill your Amalia. And it's like, well, that sucks. Like, what else is this for, right? And it's like, I don't know. Like, it's like, I guess it's for spirits, but like, I'm not dedicating sideboard spots to spirits. It just happens to be one of the cards, for example, that Gruul could bring in, or Boros Aggro could bring in, or Boros Heroic. And so it's kind of awkward. I think the other thing is that what you just described has described Hidden Strings for its entire life in Pioneer. And it is also not in our power rankings. But they don't have the same hate cards. So what's happening? Like, did we just hit a week? Go ahead.
I don't know if we necessarily just hit a week, or if it's that, like, you know, decks that operate in the same space as Amalia, right? Talking about like the things like Heroic, you know, other small low to the ground creature decks in general. Those are things also catching, you know, hate from swaths of the format. And I think the addition of some of the, you know, breakout decks in at the Pro Tour, especially like you know, the Vampires deck and things like that, those also inherently are good against the game plan of like Amalia, of just putting creatures in play. It's a lot easier for them to just kind of like ride out some removal spells with a threat and march all over the Amalia deck in a way that the other builds of the deck could not necessarily do before. So I don't know if it's they're catching strays in the same way that, you know, decks like Hidden Strings kind of can catch some strays when you know, the format either gets a little bit faster or the format has a little more disruption in it. But the end result is that like the deck is not performing, or at least did not perform this week. And even looking back at like past weeks, has not been having a
the last 30 days have not been good to Amalia combo. Like, let's just be clear. Like, it actually has red matchups all over the place. In matchups that you would like maybe consider good. The thing is it's also just not that many matches. You know, its most played match is blue-white control, which we already know is bad. And then its next most played match is Phoenix, which is only coming in at 50%. And maybe it's also, I don't know, maybe it's a symptom of that. Like, Phoenix also looks to have, I mean, Phoenix has a negative Lotus Field matchup, though, so I don't know. I don't know, man.
Yeah, I mean, we'll kind of get into what else is going on in the format, and maybe that'll tell us.
I have a thought, and it actually has to do with our next deck, and that is how many Thoughtseize decks are in the format now. So I just want to be clear: the two decks we just covered, Hidden Strings, Amalia, not close. Hidden Strings got 0.
They're the big three decks going into the Pro Tour.
Yeah.
To think about, like Lotus Field being one of the ones where it's like you got to make sure that you have a plan for that deck. You know, that I think all the decks that people play still have good plans against that and do well against it. And the same thing for Amalia. Amalia, a very known quantity you had to be prepared to interact with and beat. And that also, you know, easier to have a successful plan that shuts them down than some of the other decks in the format you might be targeting that you might be okay with having a leaner situation again in terms of the edge you're gaining.
Love it. Our first deck with 12 points, honorable mention, is Waste Not. What in the world? What's so funny is this isn't the only mono black deck to get points. Also, just straight mono black mid range got a bunch of points. But like, you know, one of the things that I've seen a lot of people kind of tout is the power of Go Blink. You know, just like Go Blink is in a good position. I remember last Pioneer season, I felt this way, Abe, and I sent you probably like the most Go Blank / Colgan's Command / Bloodthirsty Adversary black red lists that you probably didn't even read them all. You were like, Spencer, I get it. This is what you think the format's about. But like now people are just going in. They're just like, no. This is what the format's about.
Yeah, and I think that there's two things really going on in the like mono black waste not, discard deck space. A big part of it, yeah, is go blank, and that kind of attack on the treasure cruise, return to the ranks, kind of thing going on. In addition to just fighting over raw quantity and some of the other mid range matchups.
I think also just fighting over like pieces of like even vampires. It feels like getting them down on resources. Like if you have Thoughtseize, Fatal Push, or sorry, no, Thoughtseize, Duress, and Go Blank, you get them down on resources, and they actually need their resources to operate.
Yeah, especially the Rakdos Vampires deck as compared to some of the previous iterations of Rakdos mid range. It's really leaning on Vein Ripper to make a smaller game much more winnable, and that's the other piece I think of the mono black discard deck that is like well positioned in that is they just have more of the removal that cleanly answers that. They have copies of Extinction Event, they have copies of Liliana the Veil, they have copies of Shoulders Edict, things that can cleanly answer a Vein Ripper without really dealing with the ward side of things, and having ways to fight over the game, like being prepared to fight over the games that are a lot about just shredding each other's hands and then seeing what sticks. It just has more things that play in that kind of game better. And like the go blank stuff, as like a top end of those games, it's like, okay, if we're gonna just trade duresses and thoughtseizes and have the last thing stand, it's like, okay, I'll tag your, even if I wind up hitting like, a land and a removal spell you weren't gonna cash in on for a while, that's going to keep you from getting the 6 mana for your Vein Ripper. That's going to make your Mutavaults that I wind up just trading my removal spells with, start to hurt more in the sense of your development of your game plan. And yeah, I think that all of that, along with like things like Waste Not plus Skyreach Sanitarium, like leads to having a deck that is grinding out the small games better than, a lot of the other black red decks can, by being just mono black and having access to these resource engines. And that I think is pretty novel to the format and is pretty indicative of what's going on at the highest, right? Like the winner's metagame of it is that decks that can really perform well in those areas, right? Having a plan against Phoenix, being able to slog through the games where you're just trading resources the whole time, to have the last thing standing with the other black red decks, and plans against the control decks as well. All of that lines up really well against what's winning right now, likely as a product of those decks pushing out some of the things that this might have more trouble with, like the Amalias or Heroics of the world.
Yeah, I gotta ask, is this sustainable? Like, can this meme of a deck stay in the metagame for much longer?
I think that it's a deck that in the format at large loses points against a lot of the things that we aren't talking about here today. A lot of things like the various combo decks, the various like other takes in the mid-range decks, creature decks, even things like some of the go bigger decks. I think it has more trouble against the decks that have access to some really powerful cards like Fable and like the better red cards. But that doesn't mean that this deck is bad. It's just that I think that it's not going to be your best choice into an open room.
I'd love to talk about our next deck because it does play Go Blank, Duress, Thoughtseize, Fable of the Mirror Breaker, some other Reckoner Bankbusters. This deck is on my hot list of decks to immediately be trying because it is basically creativity that is Rakdos Transmogrify. Okay, I have like a lot of opinions about Pioneer right now, and one of them comes from the stat that's like the funniest stat in Magic, which is that no Pro Tour has been won since the return of the Pro Tour without Fable of the Mirror Breaker in your 75. And I don't think that anything has changed other than Phoenix dominance to make me think you should not be playing Fable of, like, the only reason not to be playing Phoenix is to be playing Fable of the Mirror Breaker. And this deck looks like a really over-the-top blue, like black-red control Fable of the Mirror Breaker deck. This is like right up my alley. What are your thoughts on this new addition to Pioneer that just came out of left field.
Yeah, I mean, so this deck did exist on the fringes around RC season. Like I know that Jund Transmogrify was a deck that we saw some of. This is really leaned into using Case of the Stash Skeleton as like instead of like a Seeker's Chariot.
Yeah, shout yourself out there, buddy.
Card's good. So Case of the Stash Skeleton being another way to have a transmog target that is cheap that also your opponent does not want to kill, being a deck that has and wants access to unique effects and answers and has a bit of a combo element to it, being like, okay, well, you killed my skeleton, so now I can go get my transmogrify, or I can go get my, the answer I need. I can go get my one-op Nixilis to start generating value. I can, I can even just sack this and go get another Fable or another case of the Stash Skeleton, kind of chain those. There's a lot of like utility in that while also being something that's enabling the more unfair parts of things. And again, this is more black-red decks that are finding ways around playing the small games that are full of the discard spells. Is like, this format is just a lot of flavors of Rakdos and then Phoenix and a lot of things that are kind of struggling to stay above water in that. This has access to a lot of the same removal. It's just a different threat suite, a different game plan and how it's doing that. But there are advantages to that too. Like the Transmogrify stuff is really good. Getting an Atraxa into play is very, very strong. It's, another way to put a lot of power on a lot of advantage on the board, and also a lot of advantage into like closing the game and becoming very far ahead very quickly, especially in a lot of these mid-range mirrors. And when the thing that you might be transmogrifying, you don't care about getting killed. Like, okay, you kind of 2-for-1 me on the transmogrify and the token that I was targeting. When that token is something that's then unlocking Demonic Tutor, it undoes a lot of that feel bad. And also, like, the case itself gives insulation to the premier difficult to answer threat of the format being Vein Ripper with the ward sacrifice a creature. Have expendable creatures to partner with your, go for the throat, Heartless Acts, Molten Collapses, whatever it is that your Bitter Triumphs, whatever your removal of choices that can kill that 6/5. Now you're like, okay, I will sacrifice a creature, thank you very much, and then I'll go tutor for my next answer. And that is also like a really powerful play pattern with that in the context of the format at large.
Yeah, I really love that, and I think it works both ways. Like, you look at Atraxa, you transmogrify into Atraxa, and it's like, okay, kill this. I've already recouped everything. And it's one of the reasons that I think that creativity has such a weird place in Modern, where people, like, the combo was really good for like 3 weeks, right? The World Spineborn combo. And there are weeks where we see that deck suddenly top 8 a challenge, or suddenly do well at an RC, whatever. But then, like, no other results, right? But we've also seen, like, people try different packages, including Atraxa, for that deck. And what's really nice about this deck, I'm just going to give you, like, a play pattern example, is, like, I Atraxa, and I hit Planeswalker. And I don't know how many Ob Nixilis are correct, but, like, I'll tell you what, if my opponent hits an Ob Nixilis off an Atraxa, I might just be conceding. Because either one of two things are happening. One, I can't kill that Atraxa, so it's going to attack me for 7, and then they're going to Ob it and ult another their second Ob, because it just does that. Or 2, I can kill it, and now I'm down even more resources against this Atraxa, and I have to deal with an Ob Nixilis.
Yeah, I think if you think about what the Rakdos decks at large are doing, and kind of a thing that was felt before the Pro Tour about, like, Rakdos needs a way to be winning these games faster than Shieldred was winning them. When you kind of Thoughtseize them, shred their hand, and they're like, okay, here's my Shieldred. This is going to ride the game out to victory. That was not cutting it anymore in the kind of things. It was too easy to answer, and it was not winning the game fast enough, which is why Archfiend that are all started popping up, and ultimately Vein Ripper became a solution. It's hard to answer. It ends the game. Uh, Atraxa is, probably the only creature better than Vane Ripper to put into play fast. It just has more hoops you have to jump through to do it. But this is just a different flavor of a Rakdos deck that is playing a lot of the same good cards, a lot of the same good game plans, and it wants to be closing the game as soon as it's casting its threat. It wants to be entering okay, this is the end game. Either I'm winning because I've done this and because I'm killing you with this creature, or the competitive portion of the game is ended. I'm really far ahead. And so this kind of does it by out muscling you in terms of resources compared to choking you on what you have access to with like Vane Ripper. Those two threats are approaching the game in those kind of opposite prongs, and one is a little bit better against the other. Heads up, you'd rather be attracting into the world where people are.
I don't know. It depends. Are you on the play with the Thoughtseize? If you're on the play with the Thoughtseize, you have Thoughtseize on one. That I might rather be the Vane Ripper deck. I'm not sure.
Right. I mean, it's in the heads up if they both get to do their thing. If I go Sorin minus, put in a Vane Ripper, and then my opponent goes, okay, untap, transmog, make an Atraxa,
I agree with you. I'm mostly memeing here. Obviously the Atraxa deck is favored, but it is funny to think how powerful the show and tell vampire deck. I didn't say this on we played the challenge together, me and my friends, as we often do. But we played against a scam deck that was playing. I think it took 23rd or something in that challenge, but it played the Atraxa Vane Ripper. It played no other vampires, and it had us debating is Bloodtithe Harvester modern playable if Vane Ripper is that good? Is it worth it just to put Bloodtithe Harvester in your deck for Grief, for example, if this combo is that good? All right, let's go on to the next deck. I think that this is so funny because I think it's the most loved and most hated deck simultaneously in CCMTG history for Pioneer, and that is Blue-White, coming in with 21 points, tied for third, fourth. So I just wanted to clear that, it's pretty up there. The reason we put it at 4 is because it had less finishes, which is how we tie break. Man, this deck got the most cards in the last year. That I think we said this before the Pro Tour that you went to, Abe. That we were oh, this got the most cards. It's so funny to think back to when we were playing Mana Leak in Blue-White Control in Modern. Not even it was very, very shortly before the pandemic. That, because we didn't have Counterspell yet. It was no, Mana Leak is the best thing to be doing. And now we have now this Pioneer deck has better Mana Leak.
Yeah, I mean, long gone are the days of saying, oh yeah, Azorius Control is a deck full of cancels. It is now a deck full of 2-mana interactive spells. And that is a big...
It's crazy.
It's a big upgrade.
This is a deck that it is my favorite deck's very worst matchup, in my opinion. I think that it is Gruul's worst matchup. I think that despite the fact that you're playing a bunch of it might not be now. I think that we see a lot less farewells than we once did, but historically it's been the worst matchup. And I think that even worse than that is that the things that really pushed over the top, like farewell and things like that, are being removed for all right, let's just play more 2-mana interaction. And I mean, between Deduce, between Get Lost, No More Lies, this deck got a lot. I hesitate, though, on this deck, and I'll tell you why, Abe, is that it suffers from the blue-white problem. Not even just the blue-white problem. I think blue-black suffers from this a little bit more than blue-white does from this. We've all played a mid-range deck where we've drawn the wrong part of our deck, right? And that is control has to happen to an extreme. if I draw the lands in the wrong order in a control deck, it can cost me. And there's a lot that goes into like fixing that. We see it in standard a lot. But here's the thing. Azorius Control has negative matchups against Izzet Phoenix, Rakdos Vampires, and Lotus Field combo. And then it dumpsters a bunch of other stuff. So, like, am I just skill diffing every Phoenix player I play against? That feels really hard in this metagame.
Yeah, I think Azorius Control is really good at policing a breadth of the format. It does have trouble against, like, some builds of Phoenix, some builds of Blue White. The draws do need to line up, but I do think that it's like that there's things going on that are keeping Azorius Control relevant. It's not people are running back the same 75 week to week to week. That you can see in the way those decks are being built that the mirror is becoming less and less prevalent. It's losing metagame share, and it's kind of adapting to hang on to its positioning and benefiting off of keeping down some of these highly played decks that are not showing up in our power rankings today. Like, for example, a big one is just before the Pro Tour, like, it was assumed to me that most of my blue-white opponents would be playing Yorion. That was just, like, factual. It was, like, much more necessary because the deck was really well positioned coming into the event. It had been winning a lot, but you needed that for the mirrors. It made it so that in your, like, Amalia matchups and stuff, like, you had your first lockdown was also your second. You needed the extra resources to fight these mirrors. None of the lists that are placing in the top, like, finishes in these challenges have Yorion at all. I don't even think I saw a single Yorion blue white.
Yeah, I looked at quite a few lists. I did not see one.
And honestly, it seems like we're all back to 60.
All the cards we mentioned that it got are spells, right? Right. So, like, at some point, it's like, well, I don't need the fluff. Like, I don't need the other stuff. I really like what you said about it keeping other stuff out. I think that it does police the format in a real way. Like, you think about, I don't know these matchups off the top of my head, but, like, I know that, like, Cruel is a deck that I play a lot. Really bad matchup. I know that, in anything like Boros Convoke, I can't imagine playing against this blue version of Blue White with 4, like, how many sweepers does it have post board against Boros at this point? It's got to be like 9.
Yeah, I mean, it's got usually like a full set of lockdowns, and then also, like, multiple verdicts, sunfalls. It's bringing the kitchen sink.
Yeah, and the thing is I look at X-Files list, who took first in one of the challenges here, and he's playing Hollow Moonlight main. And I was just thinking of the number of applications that card has in this format right now. A card that maybe fell off a little bit in Modern, that was seeing a ton of play. But, like, how many times is that relevant right now? Like, that's a main deck inclusion that just, like, dumpsters on some of the decks. I don't know. I think this deck is good, but not well positioned, if that makes sense. That's kind of a weird thing to say.
Yeah, I mean, like I kind of mentioned, I can see in the way that the decks are changing, week to week, and have even changed in the last month and a half, that it is fighting for its points. It's fighting to have its metagame share. It knows what it needs to do to hold on to, like, it knows why it's strong. It knows what it needs to do to hold on to the matchups it has, but it is, kind of trying to rebalance itself to not be preyed upon, but to be able to hold on to what it has. And I think things like Hallowed Moonlight being good against either, okay, they store in minus, I'll Hallowed Moonlight in response. You're going to put nothing into play. That's going to slow you down a lot there. You're going to try to go for your, like, bring out your Arclight Phoenixes, Hallowed Moonlight. Those are gone now. You're going to cast Transmogrify, Creativity, all those things. Even like Collect Company, Hallowed Moonlight has you covered there. And just focusing on what makes the deck good where it is good, I think that all, in the context of the way the Pioneer is right now, is very good. And I think that having, access to answers like Sunfall for, like, Vein Ripper is really strong. So, like, all those things coalesce into the deck being playable and having results, still holding on to it, but it's not the same way where, coming out of the Atlanta RC, a lot of the buzz was just okay, like blue white is the top dog. It's good against all these decks. It pummels Amalia and has game everywhere else. It's not that cut and dry anymore. So it's really kind of going through this, but the players are figuring out how to win with it and how to build it to its strengths. And those strengths are good enough to keep it a real player in the format.
I agree. Coming in third, fourth, tied with it is Vamps. We talked about this deck probably the most last time. Not a lot has changed in Vampires, to be honest. The questions for Vampires have relatively remained the same. Like, what is the split? Like, how many Dust Legion Zealots do you want? Do you want a main deck Duress? How many big kill spells do you want? Whether in this deck it's always better Triumph, it looks like. Ashiok going to the board is something that team had already mentioned, that something that they wanted. How many Sheldreds do you want to play? Those have been the questions. The thing about this deck is that I think that it is the best quote-unquote deck in Pioneer. It is the if you were to pick something up and you just understood Magic on a fundamental level for your RCQ, what deck should you play? And I'd be like, you should just play Rakdos Vampires. Like, you'll figure it out in 2 rounds. It's really powerful. Turns out that it has no bad cards. We already knew that Elvish Visionary was a strong card, and then Blood Tithe Harvester continues to show its worth, and then the rest of the deck is just the same deck that's been good in Pioneer for how many years now? I don't even know. The other thing though is freaking wild is, do you remember when it wasn't Shuhei Nakamura, was it, that put the Mutavault in red black for the Pro Tour?
I think it was.
Was it Shuhei?
I think so.
And I was like, that's crazy. That seems crazy on the mana base. And then you played in this deck, you're like, yeah, well, this is broken. This is actually busted. And that's a huge boon to me. Everything I liked about the Rakdos deck, this deck does in spades. And then also, do you want Liliana on the board? Do you want Ashiok out of the board? How do you want to play the post-board games? And this deck has so many flex slots, whether it's Dust. I was playing a game today where I was like, all right, well, I'm in a board in Path of Perils, and I'm just going to turn into this, black-red control deck and, get bent. You actually, if you leave in any small removal against my Preachers and my Blood Tithe Harvesters, you're in huge trouble, because that's actually not the game I'm playing anymore. It pivots really well, and then also just, has a show and tell plan that is... LSV jokingly call it Splinter Twin, but it actually... If you... the number of games where you lose in Modern to Vampires, that you're like, oh, I think this matchup's good. How did you lose then? Oh, yeah, they had turn 3 Bane Ripper. I couldn't beat it that game.
Yeah, or even the games where I think the reason I feel comfortable saying it's kind of like a Splinter Twin thing is that the games where they don't do it, but you had to play to respect them doing it, or you had to those cost you a lot too. And kind of the theme of talking about all these different Thoughtseize decks is that the Thoughtseize, Fable, Blood Tithe Harvester, or even just Thoughtseize plus Engine decks out there are just really good. I think that the Vampires deck is the most streamlined, consistent, proactive one with the most game into getting disrupted, because it plays the most to the board. It uses its cards have the most synergies with each other and are the least punishable by just interacting with them. And that goes a long way in a format surrounded by a lot of other Thoughtseizes and, Duresses. When people are also throwing a bunch of discard spells at you, when your cards are just good to cast, when you're just drawing Dust Legion Zealots, Blood Tithe Harvesters, Fables, Sorens, and then the occasional, okay, well, I've done nothing for a while because you shredded my hand, but here's a Vein Ripper off the top. Here's a Shoulder off the top.
It's so crazy too, because the thing that this deck made me appreciate, I don't remember when it was not, I don't think it was the last RC season, but somewhere along the lines, Derek started putting a duress in his main deck, and everybody started copying it, but they wouldn't like copy his deck list. And I'd be like, I want to know why you have duress in your main deck. Like in different formats, I thought it was correct. In different builds, I thought it was correct. But in this build, in this deck, it was the first time where I'm like, you actually do want the duress main deck. Like you want there's a percentage gained that I'm not good enough at math. I'm not gonna sit there and like break it out for you. But like there's a percentage gain from like having turn one hand interaction in this deck that other versions of Black Red did not get. Like this one gets it.
And I think to take it a step further, like in a deck that has the potential to try to just, cheese a free win or, like, or maybe play it a bit slower, the information off of a single, like a turn one or turn two discard spell is so much more valuable to a deck that has a game plan like that and could benefit from knowing and having the information of which direction should I pilot this game from a mid-range perspective? Should I be the aggressor and just be putting a Vein Ripper into play and saying, okay, I force them to have drawn the answer in the last two turns? Or is it like, okay, well, let's play this a bit slower and I should be using my Sorin as an advantage engine with the rest of my small stuff? Getting to see your opponent's hand is a very, very, very big source of information to tell you how to play the rest of that game. And having access to that start more is worth even the, sometimes awkwardness of duress, not hitting what you needed to, but you're so much happier to take just a random removal spell and not be able to take their threat when your threat is the apex threat. When you're putting in Vein Ripper and that's the best thing to put in, and that's the best thing to do that fast, you care more about making sure that's going to be the thing, the defining thing of the game, than necessarily being like, oh, this couldn't take my opponent's good 2-drop creature. Like, couldn't take their Inti, or I couldn't take, their 2-drop play. It's like, that doesn't matter so much. What matters is that you don't have your Children's Edict, your Heartless Act, your Extinction Event that's going to cleanly answer my Vein Ripper. You have to deal with the 6/5 now.
Let's go on to our next deck, the one that I think you will see so much of at your RCQs, because people love a good Yorion deck. People love a good Up the Beanstalk deck. It also plays Fable. It also plays Leyline Binding. This is the Niv to Light deck. And this deck really only got one card recently. But it actually might have made a big difference in Lightning Helix Aid. And I'm kind of curious. I looked at a lot of these decks today. This deck kind of looks good. Like, in a world of Thoughtseize Duress, being able to just have mono good cards in an 80 card deck, like, this is something we've seen before to combat that style of metagame, right?
Yeah, the Niv to Light deck gets to, like, we're talking about, and I was talking about how the blue-white decks have kind of had to move away from the Yorion stuff to have like resource abundance to just make sure they're doing their thing. What I think the Niv to Light deck does really, really well is generate an abundance of resources. It always has access to the right cards through Bring to Light being a very powerful way to use a toolbox. Be that through being able to find, their copy of Unmoored Ego, or find the Sunfall they need, or, just have another way to put a Niv Mizzet or an Omnath into play. There's even bullets in here like Clothis, which are probably fantastic against Arclight Phoenix or anything of the like.
Enamored Ego, just like in the main deck.
Yeah, exactly. Like being able to just find the thing that you need while also having access to some really, really strong removal, catch-all removal like Vanishing Burst and, like to your point, Lightning Helix, that play really well in these kinds of games. It has a lot of cards that just go +1, and a lot of things you can roll off the top of your library that feel fantastic to draw that will put you right back in things, in the same vein that like being able to put an Atrax into play does, but your whole deck is doing that. And especially in a world of getting Thoughtseized and go blanked and, duressed every turn, like okay, sure, you Thoughtseize my Fable, but I'm also just going to play a Wandering Mind and find my next thing. Or, okay, you took my Bring to Light, but I have enough to Beanstalk and play, and I will draw something eventually. I will, like, my Leyline Bindings will answer your problem permanence and slowly chip away at the problem. I think there's like a lot that only this deck is really able to do successfully as a Yorion deck, right? Like, it's the only deck in the format successfully doing Yorion's thing of just producing enough material and card advantage to snowball into the late game. And it does it really well, and that gives it kind of a unique angle on how it's approaching the format, which is why it's the only deck of these that we're talking about which really focuses on value. There's not a lot of decks in the format right now that care about having more and more resources and snowballing the game upward. It's a lot of trying to end the game with its thing. And that, I think, creates room for this deck to be as successful as it is kind of the only game in town in terms of approaching the format in that way. Which is why it's not surprising me that, if you condensed all of the Rakdos and like Thoughtseize archetypes, those score much higher than Niv to Light together. But Niv would still come in like, what it is, 25 points here. It would come in at just between the Rakdos Transmog and the Vampires deck at, 3/4 of the score as that Rakdos pillar would be if you combined those archetypes. Not saying you should, but if you were to combine the shells of those decks and say, okay, this is one pillar of the format, this is able to have a share of the metagame and a share of the win rate.
I do think that that's a way you could look at the format, though, right? Like, if you just looked at Thoughtseize decks, especially these Thoughtseize decks, like, because it's a Waste Not deck, a Vampires deck, and a Control Combo deck, they're just all trying to use the best card in the format in different ways. But the game plan is always the same. It's disrupt your opponent this way, and then get to your game. I agree with you, though. I think that you could reasonably, especially with the combo control deck and the Vampires deck, you could actually just say, like, this is a pillar of the format that you need to understand, and like how they interact might be a little bit different. But if you can like find bridge cards that like interact with both, it would actually impact you a lot. I think this deck does something really interesting. I want to give you another shout out. Do you realize that Misplaced Ginger put Analyze of Pollen on the map for you? So you're like batting pretty high right now on your pick two.
I'm always batting high on the pick twos.
I think this deck is really interesting for a couple of reasons. One, it's the only deck that gets to play Fable, Passage, and Omnath, which, like, you're like, well, why does that matter? Like, Fable Passage kind of sucks compared to, like, most stuff. But, like, in this deck specifically, that's a huge boon. How many times are you going to, like, you're going to end up with an Omnath in play where if you draw Fable Passage, it's, like, the best draw in your deck. Or one of them, it saves you. I don't know. I think that the way these decks are built are really interesting to me. The number of nibs between the Supreme, the Reborn, the Wandering Mind was a card that we talked about. Might have been mine when it came out. That like it's like it has enough value, right? Like that it'll see play, and it never did. And now all of these lists are playing 3, and it's one of the really cool things about these type of decks is they're toolbox decks, right? Like they get the tools that they need, and in this deck you have Analyze with Pollen and Bring to Light from a deck builder's perspective to grab whatever you want. I don't know, it's really cool. I think
I do think Analyze the Pollen as like more Bring to Lights for your Niv Mizzets. Like you can save one of like it's a way to make sure your mana works, which already was a bit of like you're happy to play more virtual copies of Fabled Passage. You're happy to play more ways to find the right basic at the right time, but also another way to say, okay, just Bring the Light. That can go find my Sunfall, my my Unmoored Ego, whatever my bullet spell is I need to cast. This Analyze the Pollen, I can follow up to that play, with I'll go find the Niv Mizzet, I'll go find, you know, the Omnath, whatever it is I need. I can even go find the Valky to cast, or the Tibalt to cast as Valky, or Valky to cast Tibalt. Like I can find my real threat with this one while using the Bring Light for its full utility, instead of having to be like, well, I want to be able to go find this thing that's a good answer, but if I do that, I'm not going to be able to produce a meaningful clock. That supplementing effect there, I think, is also really easy to understate, but I think is pretty relevant to the success of the deck.
The number one deck, though, I'm glad we had this long conversation about all these decks. That deck came in with 25 points, in case we didn't mention it. I don't know if we did. The next deck comes in with 56 points.
What could that possibly be?
Abe, you said you were going to stay calm.
Sorry.
You gonna be okay? Do you need a minute? I combined Grixis, because whatever, with blue-red for this. We have birds coming in with 56 points. We had a really cool interaction that I think that, like, it makes the Discord worth it sometimes, that I want to mention, where I said something on the podcast last time where it was like, I don't hate the fact that Treasure Cruise exists in the format. I hate that it is on one deck. And that is the problem with Treasure Cruise. And you responded in the Discord to somebody. You may not even respond to me too. And you were like, somebody said this to me in a different way, and I really got it. I really understood what Spencer was saying. Where sometimes, like, we're talking on the episode and we're like thinking of our point. We're trying to, like, communicate and things like that to, like, make a cohesive show. But are we aligned here? Like, is Treasure Cruise both the problem and also not the problem?
Oh, I think that Treasure Cruise is the problem, and the fact that it only appears in this one style of deck is, like, part of why it's the problem. Like, I think that it's the problem, and it gets to hide behind not being the problem because the format coalesces around this one way to play the one powerful card, because there's only really one way to enable it. Or there's one best way to enable it, and it's so homogenous.
So let's say that, like, sorry, we're gonna go off on a tangent on this Power Rankings episode because I actually want to have this conversation. If I banned Phoenix tomorrow, do you believe that, like, there's a Ledger Shredder, like, whatever, like some blue-red prowess deck, or blue-red, maybe it's not blue-red, like, it's like,
I believe
there's a Ledger Shredder.
I believe that if you have the card Treasure Cruise in the format, the best way to enable Treasure Cruise, current state of things, to fuel Delport consistently, is to play a bunch of cheap interactive spells that are universally castable, as well as cantrips, so that you can, right, store a mana for your Treasure Cruise in your setup spell for this other cheap interactive spell. So, do I think that it could be that blue-black, you know, mid-range or whatever comes back as the thing?
I was thinking, like, 2-layer and tear, like, so.
Do you think that it could? Do I think it would be like, you know, the third path iconic class, young pyromancer stuff?
Oh, that sounds fun.
I mean, it would be something, but I would bet that it would be a combination of Consider and Opt, and maybe some Sleight of Hands, maybe some Picklock Pranksters, Treasure Cruise, and Dude, Fiery Impulse or Thoughtseize, or
that was a huge miss for us. I've been giving us credit for, like, our pick set reviews. Picklock Prankster, holy. The fact that that card gets Brazen Borrower is nuts. Why does it do that? Why does it do that?
Anyway,
did you watch the championship?
Is that Treasure Cruise, and this is the Treasure Cruise and Fable the Mirror Breaker. I think these are two. This is like a really salient way to talk about the point that you were talking about that I kind of needed to sit with a bit to really get between shows. Fable the Mirror Breaker is hands down, right, like the best individual card in Pioneer, right? It's the card that...
It's not close.
It's the most played card across archetypes. It is a card that
So
when I was
actually,
preparing for the
I
Pro Tour,
actually
we
think
were
it
like,
is.
how can we put Fable into an existing good deck and make it work because this card is so powerful. It is so good, right? Treasure Cruise is probably actually a better card than Fable. But you don't see Treasure Cruise go into a bunch of different decks because it's a stronger card, but not a better card on its own. It requires you to enable it to be good. Um, there's only one deck that does the thing that Treasure Cruise asks, so and it always does it the same way, and so it's like even more miserable to just have it sit around and be its thing because unlike something like Fable, where people play it and it leads to a wide variety of games or different variety of game plans because it is such a powerful role player, Treasure Cruise is just the ends to which there is a means of playing the same cantrip logged game of Magic over and over and over again, round after round. And also, that wins a lot of matches. The Arclight Phoenix deck is very good, and it has some very diverse game plans of how it can attack people. And Treasure Cruise is a big part of that in being resilient to being interacted with. And it's also very resilient to the ways that people interact with the Arclight Phoenix deck. It's very easy for the deck to just move away from a Treasure Cruise or decide not to take Treasure Cruise off of its cantrips or loot away its Treasure Cruises when they're not effective
Sure.
versus being able to just find a Treasure Cruise when you need one.
I think
So
I
all of those
don't.
things lend to it just being, unsurprisingly,
I,
the best deck in
I
Pioneer this
don't.
week.
I don't want to turn this into like an anti-birds podcast because, like, I don't think that's what is happening in Pioneer right now. I think that I mean you do, and that's okay. Like, I think that you clearly have established your opinion of there's a problem, and I agree. I'm not going to say that like your problem is not a problem. I want to correct something you said because it made the rounds on Twitter today. That the most played card in Pioneer is actually Thoughtseize, as far as like winning metagames. To be fair, the cards in order for 5-0 deck lists in March were Thoughtseize, Fatal Push, and then Fable of the Mirrorbreaker. So like I think your point is valid. Yeah, there are two mono black decks right now. So those were gonna win out over Fable. So if we ban Treasure Cruise, does that make meaningful impacts other than you need to now ban Fable?
I think that Fable is less offensive than Treasure Cruise despite its play rate because, right, that's kind of like back to the point of Treasure Cruise is only in one deck. Fable is played across several successful archetypes, right?
Yeah.
Fable is played in the black-red decks. It's played in these Nibelite decks. It's played in these creativity decks, like the non-black creativity decks, or like
Yeah.
non-black decks.
It's in blue red and black red creativity.
It was played in successful Jeskai control decks, Jeskai creativity decks.
I have it in Gruul right now. Like
it is an enabling card on some really, really, strong things. It's one of the best value cards you can play. It just does a lot of lifting, but a lot of decks get access to it for cheap and for easy. And it's just good. It's not when someone plays Fable Mirrorbreaker, it's a lot, but the way that the game plays out, you have a lot of points of interacting with it. And there are ways that if the format was balanced around, I mean, there were times where Fable was just the premier thing, right? In the format that was really defined by like for like a year and a half of being kind of Rakdos against Mono Green, as like the top two decks, like maybe Phoenix in there or something in the mix sometimes. It was like Bone Crusher Giant was a big part of the game and a big part of the metagame because it was the best answer to a lot of the threats going on, especially like either when you're on the play against the Llanowar Elves or you're on the draw against the Fable, or like it. We could go back to a world where Fable is the defining breakpoint of the interaction people play. I think it is pretty like different to exist in the world where there isn't a thing like that for Treasure Cruise, and also Treasure Cruise is not as essential to the success of a lot of these decks that play it, because in the face of getting like Leyline of the Voided or Hearst or whatever, they ledger shred it away and play on. I mean, what I will say is, Izzet Phoenix is, according to the Goldfish data, the second most played deck. It does not win every event. However, it does do well in every event. People do not gravitate towards playing it a lot, probably because it's very decision intensive, and also because it is somewhat repetitive and boring to play a lot of. That being said, I don't want to have this kind of come away with the impression of like the format is doom and gloom and like play birds or die. Like we said, there's a lot of these decks that are very good and even have, good matchups against the Arclight Phoenix deck. It's just the most consistent thing against the breadth of the format. And much like Arclight Phoenix in modern past, where it was like just it had the tools to be good against everything in a lot of spots, I think Izzet Phoenix has a lot of that benefit, and you can gain a lot by spending hours getting good at playing the deck and enjoying it and doing that. And I don't want to take away from that in the sense of like, what's important or what's new to Izzet. There's not a lot new to Izzet. I would say keeping up with the sideboards and seeing what they're doing and what their jukes are, especially in a world where it's not like open deck list like Pro Tour was, where like you don't know if they have young pyromancers or crackling drakes or fables or whatever their cyber plans are. Knowing that as people have to play against that deck, I think is really important. Kind of an understanding of what the different plans are and how you need to adapt to the different threats that they can present is important. But also, it's not the only way to attack the format successfully. Like I think we've outlined pretty well on this episode so far. Like, and I think that things like, some people are playing Ashiok, some people aren't. Some people really care about the mirrors. Some people like, care more about having a game in the red-black matchups. I think.
Just to be clear, I just want to be clear that my stance is that you should play Ashiok.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, I would say it's far from a consensus as far as how many you play or if you play them. You even said there's like a few copies of Grixis Phoenix floating around somewhere in the results. I think it's like one or two, looking over it myself. But, there are different ways to approach the deck and to tune it. And I think that if you're thinking to yourself, I want to be playing a deck in Pioneer that I know I can play for the entire RSQ season, right? Let's get back to what the real purpose of doing this episode right now is. It's like we're on the cusp, we're on the precipice of playing a lot of Pioneer. I think it is really important that if you're someone who hasn't really figured that out, wants to find something, you can't just pick up Phoenix and be a master with it. It's not actually a deck that works like that so much. Some of the games are easy, but some of the games are really hard. And knowing how to navigate those from both sides is really valuable. And I think that if I were to attribute Phoenix's real success to and continued success to anything, especially at like a challenge or RCQ level, I would say a big piece of that could be that people have not taken the time to really understand how to navigate every game with or against Phoenix as well as they could. And maybe if people knew more how to shut down the Phoenix deck and, what really hurt it or, what kinds of builds had which weaknesses and stuff, maybe it would hurt it some in these results. And you will be a better off Pioneer player for taking the time to really explore this deck as an option for yourself, even if you decide that it's not something for you. Even if you decide that you want to approach the format in a different way.
That's going to do it for the power rankings. Abe, what would you play in Pioneer for your first RSQ if it was tomorrow, and why?
If my first RSQ was tomorrow, I would probably do exactly this in the week upcoming. So let's say I knew my RSQ was let's say I knew the RSQ was this weekend. I knew I had this week to prepare. I would try the Niv to Light decks. I do like playing decks that are approaching the format from the other end of things, just in general. I think it's like a good place to be. It makes you really differentiated in a lot of the things people will do at especially an RSQ level of copying and pasting deck lists and stuff. You'll be positioned well against that, against what people are trying to just do generically. and that can prove really helpful. If I didn't like the feeling of that, I would be playing Arclight Phoenix. I would be putting in, probably like a league or two a day of just getting really, really smooth again and being like, okay, let's cook, because I think that all in all, that's going to be the deck that's going to be the talk of the town in terms of what's winning, either in your scene or when you look on Twitter, or when the results start coming out.
I'm in a really similar spot, and I think that it might not surprise people that I would be in a similar spot. I would try Practice Transmogrify. I think that deck is exactly what Spencer likes to do in Magic, from like a combo control type element. If I didn't feel like I got the results that I wanted, I would end up playing Vamps. I think that it has a naturally good Birds matchup, which is something that I value when going. Like, I like beating the best deck, and what's funny is, like, you go to Goldfish, you're like, well, Spencer, you're saying the best deck is Birds, but like it's clearly Vamps, and it's like, okay, but like I'd rather play a Vamps mirror than be disfavored against Birds, which is like, to me, from the results of the mid-level Magic, like the Magic that the top eights are going to consist of, when I go to my RCQ, I'd much rather be on the Vamp side than the Bird side. Like, that's where I'd rather be. So that's it for me. I think that both approaches, for what it's worth, are really good, and I think that it's really interesting that, like, we went from a world where there were like 3 combo decks all of a sudden to like, oh, maybe combo's not it, because everyone just and their mom decided to play Thoughtseize, and it's kind of hard to break through Thoughtseizes with these combo decks specifically.
Yeah, and I think that, just as a last thing, I think it's important that if you're trying to be a reasonable deck gamer, obviously the decks we spoke about today, I think, are all reasonable. Maybe Waste not being the least reasonable of them, because it is kind of relying on the positioning of these other decks currently. Say that way, but I think Amalia still remains a reasonable deck. I think even decks like Convoke remain a reasonable deck just because they're currently targeted and hated out by the way decks are being constructed. They still are very powerful, proactive decks doing some of the strongest things you can do in Pioneer. And just because they're poorly positioned in the context of this snapshot of the metagame does not mean that those things are not playable. But it is important, if you're going to, you need to know what you're walking into. And currently the state of the metagame is one where it's pretty hostile to it. And so I say that to say that when you're making your decisions, if you have a deck you like already and you feel like you know how you would approach these matchups, or you want to understand these matchups better before you decide on how to do it, go full on and do that. Don't just feel like your deck is, just it wasn't listed here, is not still one of the reasonable decks. I think Pioneer is still a really broad format. And that's part of why Phoenix is so successful, is it has the tools to deal with a really broad format in a way that these other decks fighting for space kind of need to clash with each other, and Phoenix doesn't.
To your Patreon of $5 or more, you get access to our Patreon question. We did a reboot of the Patreon question this month. We typically this would be our week to do our bonus episode. I wanted to make sure that we respected Mason, so we're not doing it this week. We're gonna figure out when we're gonna do it. But when we do those episodes, we like to have Patreon questions ready that maybe we didn't answer through the month. And I was like, I feel like people have pressure on themselves. Like, they want their question to be picked for the episode. And so I made a post in the Discord that I got personal messages about, that I got responses about. And you can ask anything in the Patreon question. Jacob asked a question that longtime listeners know the answer of, but Abe was not part of the podcast then. So Jacob asks, does pineapple belong on pizza? Quotations, totally judging, by the way. Abe?
Yeah. Put pineapple on your pizza if you want pineapple on your pizza. This is the dumbest debate in maybe culinary history.
So I have a different take. Mason says some like ridiculous things, and I'm gonna just throw him under the bus. Like, saying that flip-flops are sandals is like, what? No, they're not. Or no, sandals are slippers. He says some weird stuff, right? And like, one of the things that we've debated about a lot is, the savory and sweet thing. And I am fine if you like pineapple on pizza. Go for it. My wife likes it. My son likes it. Go for it. I don't like you defending your love of pineapple on pizza with savory and sweet. Pizza sauce is tomato-based. It's already sweet. No matter what meat topping you put on it, it's already savory and sweet. It's already happening. Don't defend
That's exactly why pineapple can fit.
Oh my gosh.
It's already happening. It's not creating. I agree.
But that's creating a new sensation. I agree. It's not creating. Also, if you like it, do it. Like, I'm not going to yuck your yum. I will say that if you're throwing a party, though, you're going to order 3 pizzas. Do not have one of them be olives. Do not have one of them be pineapple. Do not have one of them be mushrooms. Order neutral pizzas. Pizza is so easy to get right. Get a cheese, get a pepperoni, get a vegetarian or a meat lovers. Like, get pizzas that are like neutral, but like the thing is yeah, like, love what you love. I think that there are a lot of people that have defended like the pepperoni pineapple jalapeno pizza. That, like, their argument makes complete sense. And I'm like, oh, cool. I don't like pineapple, so, like, I will never eat that. But that sounds like a great choice if you're into that. Like, legitimately, that combo, like, if I enjoyed the taste of pineapple, sounds amazing. I just don't like it when people are like, oh, it's savory and sweet. I'm like, you're describing a pizza. You're literally describing why pizza is good as your defense for putting this thing that you like on it, which you can have. You can have that.
Yeah, all I gotta say is that Magic players, by and large, are some pretty opinionated people. I kind of love that about us as a scene. Tend to have some strong hold our ground opinions about some things that are not, in the grand scheme of things, pretty relevant. One of my most opinionated friends, Joel. Shoutouts to Joel. One time we were at a bar where they have a Hawaiian pizza, and I got it, and he got his pizza that he wanted, his bar pizza. And I was like, Joel, have you ever had? It was like, I don't know how you can do that. He was already starting it with the the absolutism, the like where it's one side against the other. And I was like, Joel, have you ever tried it? And he was like, no, absolutely not. I was like, Joel, why don't you try it once? And he did, and he was like, yeah, I don't know, it was not. I don't know what the whole hubbub is. It's like, that's where I want us to get as people. And that's why this question is always so, like, I'm like, this is so ridiculous to even have it be debate. Is like, why can't we get to the place where you don't voice your opinion on it until you've tried it, or say, I don't want to try it, but I don't care. Like, those are the only 2 options, I think. That's the real pineapple and pizza
I think
debate.
If you're not going to try it, you shouldn't voice an opinion. That is going to do it for the Patreon question. If you want to ask questions like that, here are wild debates where Spencer gets way too heated about something that he's already talked about 100 times and only cares about because his wife tricked his son into loving it. Join the Patreon. No, I'm just kidding. You can join the conversation for the Patreon Discord, the public Discord. The YouTube comments is like a great way to support the show. Like, if you don't have, oh man, like, post-pandemic life has been really rough. I don't have the funds to like support the show. There are a few things you could do. Leave a review on iTunes or a rating on Spotify, or leave a YouTube comment and a like. Like, honestly, those are worth so much more than we could ever express. We really appreciate them. The Patreon Discord, by the way, gives you access to this live show that we're doing, as well as tons of other benefits. Today we talked, I mixed up the daily discussion. I don't know if you saw that, Abe, about like people who talked about their world cards. Like, if they won the world championship, what would they be? So, and then just check out the rest of the CCNG network and check out Mason at Mason E. Clark, as well as coaching. I think that's the same email, right? The email he likes is the Mason E. Clark at Gmail.
at Gmail.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's also in his Twitter bio.
Oh, perfect. So just check out his Twitter. You'll find it there. Where can people find you at?
People can find me over at twitter.com/more nothings. That's it these days. That's where I do my posting.
I'm at He's the Game on Twitter, and I am every week on Need to Nerd Podcast. And we are behind on our Smash Through podcast, mostly because I've been sick. But both podcasts are great. If you like what we talk about here, we talk about this type of stuff on Smash 3 if you're a Smash player. And then just kind of getting out of the, like, relaxing, talking about fun things on Need to Nerd. And then I just want to give a shout out to, like, oh man, I might cry. I have not been more validated in my life than the fact that I was like, hey guys, I quit coaching. And multiple people were like, hey, I don't want to do coaching with anybody else. Let's do it. And I just, you know who you are. And I wanted to give you a public shout out that it actually, it means a lot. And so I'm not, for what it's worth, I'm not taking more people. But I don't know. I just wanted to, I have coaching tomorrow with somebody that only wants to work with me, and like, that's a humbling experience. I mean, I'm sure that you've had that with Hammer Time specifically, where like, they're like, okay, well, like, let me know when you're open. Like, I want to learn about Hammer Time. So, like, I don't know. It's humbling, especially with people like you and Mason on the cast with me, where like, I could recommend either of you, and you'd be great coaches.
But there's only one easy.
that's there's actually another one. He's like a lot smaller and probably would be a terrible Magic coach. What did you learn on this episode, Abe?
I learned a good bit just in preparing for this episode, and then also kind of talking out about the state of like the different Thoughtseize decks, and also just like what the pillars of the format are. I think that especially like when you started the call for us today, and we were doing the pre-show, and like looking over it and being like, look at what's not here, was like a pretty eye-opening experience. Like, okay, this is what's actually going on. And I think that just hearing your perspectives on things, in addition to like kind of how this all has clicked, that like says a lot to me about where Pioneer's at. And I feel a lot better going into the Pioneer season, and I'm actually more excited to go into Pioneer season as a result of it than maybe I was even just like starting the episode.
Yeah, I'll just behind the scenes. The next best deck was a mono black midrange at 8 points. The next best deck after that was a mono green at 6 points. And the number, I don't know about you, Abe, but like the number of people that I talked to from the Pro Tour, they were like, oh yeah, I almost played mono green. Oh yeah, I almost played mono green. Oh yeah, I almost played mono green. I think this Pioneer season is going to be surprising for people. Like, I think that there is a lot of unlocked potential, and like you have a lot of that insight from. This is also what I learned, by the way, was the prep for this episode, because I've not been connected to Pioneer. I've almost exclusively played Vampires and Gruul for the last like little while, and learning that like Mono Green has some innovations happening that like are leaking through the community, through people. They're like, oh yeah, like Seven Citadel, slam dunk in this deck. Just like fixes a lot of the problems with the fact that you're playing, like you're discarding a card to get devotion. Like there's a lot happening, but also I'm a little worried because I feel like there's not a way for the online metagame to represent what's really happening in this format. And that would be my second learning. A Molly combo should not be this underrepresented for how good it is in our winning metagame. Like, yeah, there's a lot of Thoughtseizes, there's a lot of Fatal Pushes, but is that all it takes? Like, is it that hateable?
Yeah, I guess we'll see.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. Like I said, patreon.com/CCMG, and check out our sponsors. You know, use the codes These are the things. And we'll see y'all next week with another episode of Constructive Criticism.